I never thought I'd see her face again. Not after everything. Not after the years of lies, the betrayal, the way she twisted every argument to make me feel like I was the problem. But there she was, standing on my doorstep in the pouring rain, looking exactly like the woman who had shattered my world 7 years ago. Let me take you back to the beginning, to when I was just 18 and thought I knew what love was supposed to feel like. I met Carla during my senior year of high school. She was everything I thought I wanted: beautiful, confident, magnetic in a way that made everyone in the room turn their heads when she walked in. We were in the same literature class, and I remember the first time she spoke to me. I was sitting alone during lunch, reading some paperback novel, when she slid into the seat across from me. She had this way of looking at you like you were the only person in the world, like whatever you were saying was the most fascinating thing she'd ever heard. That's how she hooked me, I think. That intense focus, that feeling of being special, chosen. When Carla turned her attention on you, it was like being caught in a spotlight, warm, intoxicating, and impossible to resist. Our first few months together were intoxicating. We'd spend hours on the phone, talking about everything and nothing. She'd text me constantly throughout the day, little messages about what she was thinking, what she was doing, how much she missed me. I felt like I was living in one of those romance movies where the guy gets the girl and everything is perfect. But even then, looking back, there were signs I chose to ignore. She was always busy with something: drama club, her part-time job at the local boutique, hanging out with friends I never quite got to meet. When I'd suggest we spend time together, she'd often have other plans. When I'd ask to join her, she'd say it wasn't my crowd, or that she needed girl time, or that I wouldn't enjoy it. I started planning my schedule around her availability. I'd turn down invitations from my own friends, hoping she'd be free. I'd wait by my phone for her calls, refreshing my messages constantly. I told myself this was what love looked like: putting the other person first, being patient, being understanding. After graduation, we both stayed in town. I started working at a local garage while taking community college classes at night. Carla got a job at a high-end restaurant downtown. She said she wanted to save money for college, but months passed and she never seemed to have any savings to show for it. She was always buying new clothes, going out with coworkers, living what seemed like a much more exciting life than mine. The distance between us started growing, but so gradually that I didn't notice it at first. It was like watching grass grow, imperceptible day by day, but undeniable over time. She'd cancel plans at the last minute, saying she had to work late or that she was exhausted. She'd go days without responding to my texts, then act like nothing had happened when she finally called. When I'd try to talk to her about it, she'd turn it around on me. I was being too needy, too demanding. Didn't I understand that she was working hard? Didn't I want her to be successful? She'd make me feel guilty for wanting to spend time with my own girlfriend, for expecting her to prioritize our relationship. I started doubting myself. Maybe I was too clingy. Maybe I was asking for too much. I began pulling back, giving her space, hoping that if I made myself less available, she'd appreciate me more. It was a game I didn't even realize I was playing, and one I was destined to lose. About 2 years into our relationship, I found out about the first time she cheated. It was by accident. I was at a party with some friends when someone mentioned seeing Carla with another guy at a bar across town. Not just talking to him, but all over him, kissing him, leaving with him. When I confronted her about it, she didn't deny it. Instead, she cried. She said she'd been feeling neglected, that I never made time for her anymore. She said she'd been lonely, that the other guy had just been there when she needed someone and I wasn't. I was devastated, but I was also 20 years old and convinced that love meant fighting for someone no matter what. She promised it would never happen again. She said she'd realized how much she loved me, how much she needed me. For a few weeks, things were better. She was more attentive, more affectionate. I thought we'd turned a corner. But the pattern was established. Every few months, there would be another incident. Another guy, another explanation, another round of tears and promises. Each time, she'd find a way to make it my fault. I wasn't romantic enough. I wasn't adventurous enough. I wasn't giving her the attention she deserved. I started changing myself, trying to become the man she seemed to want. I planned elaborate dates I couldn't afford. I wrote her letters, bought her flowers, tried to be more spontaneous. But nothing I did was ever enough. There was always something lacking, always some way I was falling short. By our 4th year together, I was a shell of the person I'd been in high school. I'd lost touch with most of my friends, partly because I was always trying to accommodate Carla's schedule, and partly because I was ashamed of what our relationship had become. I couldn't talk to anyone about the cheating, about the constant feeling that I was walking on eggshells. My family started asking questions. My mother would look at me with concern when I'd come home after another fight with Carla. My father would suggest, carefully, that maybe I deserved better. But I'd defend her, defend us, insist that every relationship had its problems. I threw myself into work, thinking that maybe if I was more successful, more financially stable, Carla would respect me more. I started taking on overtime shifts, working weekends, saving every penny. I had this fantasy that if I could just prove myself worthy, she'd stop looking elsewhere. The irony wasn't lost on me. She complained I never made time for her, but when I tried to spend time with her, she was always busy. When I focused on work to improve our future, she said I was neglecting her. I was caught in an impossible situation, and I was too invested to see it clearly. Year 5 brought the worst betrayal yet. I found out she'd been having an ongoing affair with her manager at the restaurant. Not just a one-night mistake, but an actual relationship. They'd been seeing each other for months, going on trips together, talking about a future. I found out because she left her phone at my apartment and it kept buzzing with messages from him. Intimate messages, planning messages, messages that made it clear this wasn't just physical, she was emotionally involved with him too. When she came back for her phone, I was holding it in my hands, staring at the screen. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then she snatched it away and started explaining. He meant nothing to her. It was just a distraction. She was confused, she was scared of commitment, she was self-sabotaging because she loved me too much. But this time, something in me had broken. I told her we needed to take a break. She panicked, begged me not to leave her, promised she'd quit her job, cut all contact with him. She said she'd do anything to make it work. Against my better judgment, I believed her. Again. The last 2 years of our relationship were the hardest. I was hypervigilant, constantly anxious, always looking for signs of deception. I'd check her phone when she wasn't looking, drive by her work to see if she was really there, analyze every text message and phone call. She seemed to be trying, or at least putting on a good show of trying. She'd text me throughout the day, include me in more of her plans, talk about our future together. But I could never shake the feeling that I was being managed, that she was performing the role of a committed girlfriend while still keeping her options open. The worst part was how she'd rewritten the narrative of our relationship. According to her, I was the one with trust issues. I was the one who was paranoid and controlling. She'd tell our friends that I was difficult to be with, that I was too demanding, that she was trying her best but nothing was ever good enough for me. I started believing her version of events. Maybe I was too suspicious. Maybe I was pushing her away with my jealousy and insecurity. Maybe the problems in our relationship really were my fault. The end came not with a dramatic confrontation or a caught-in-the-act moment, but with a quiet conversation over coffee with my friend Marcus. We'd been friends since middle school, and I'd been gradually pulling away from him over the years. But he'd been patient, checking in on me, inviting me to hang out even when I usually declined. That day, something in his expression told me he had something important to say. He looked uncomfortable, like he'd been wrestling with whether to speak up. He told me that everyone knew. All our mutual friends, people from high school, even acquaintances around town, everyone knew that Carla had been cheating on me for years. Not just the incidents I knew about, but many more. She'd been sleeping with multiple guys, sometimes overlapping, sometimes in relationships that lasted months. The worst part was that she'd been talking about me behind my back the entire time. She'd tell people that I was clingy, that I was bad in bed, that she was only staying with me because she felt sorry for me. She'd laugh about how easy I was to manipulate, how I believed everything she told me. Marcus said he'd wanted to tell me for years, but he didn't know how. He'd hoped I'd figure it out on my own, or that she'd eventually stop. But it had gotten worse, not better, and he couldn't stand watching me destroy myself for someone who had so little respect for me. I went home that night and sat in my car outside my apartment for 2 hours, trying to process what I'd learned. 7 years of my life. 7 years of believing I wasn't good enough, of trying to change myself, of accepting blame for things that were never my fault. When I finally went inside, Carla was there waiting for me. She'd made dinner, lit candles, put on the dress I'd bought her for our anniversary. She seemed nervous, almost frantic in her cheerfulness. She started talking about our future, about how she'd been thinking we should move in together officially, maybe start talking about marriage. She said she'd been distant lately because she was scared of how much she loved me, but she was ready to commit now. I listened to her talk, watched her perform, and felt nothing but a cold, clear certainty. I knew she must have heard through the grapevine that people were talking, that Marcus had spoken to me. This was damage control, another manipulation, another attempt to keep me hooked. I told her I knew everything. About all the cheating, all the lies, all the things she'd said about me to other people. I told her I was done, that I couldn't do this anymore, that I deserved better than what she'd given me. She tried every tactic she'd used before. Tears, anger, denial, blame shifting. She accused me of listening to gossip, of not trusting her, of giving up on us when we were so close to making it work. When that didn't work, she got angry, told me I was pathetic, that I'd never find anyone else who would put up with me. But I was done. I'd finally seen the pattern clearly, and I couldn't unsee it. I asked her to leave and to never contact me again. Within a month, I'd made the decision to leave town. I couldn't stay in a place where everyone knew the story of how I'd been played for a fool. I needed to start over, to rebuild myself away from the wreckage of what I'd thought was love. I found a job in a city 3 hours away, transferred my college credits, and rented a small apartment. I didn't tell anyone where I was going except my family and Marcus. I wanted to disappear, to become someone new, someone who wouldn't accept being treated like that. The first year was the hardest. I'd wake up every morning feeling like I was carrying a weight in my chest. I'd think about calling her, about trying to work things out, about whether I'd made a mistake. The loneliness was crushing sometimes, especially late at night when I'd remember the good times we'd shared. I threw myself into work and school with an intensity that surprised everyone, including myself. I was studying computer science, something I'd always been interested in but never had the time to pursue seriously. I worked full-time at a tech support company during the day and took classes at night. I avoided dating entirely for the first 2 years. I didn't trust my judgment, didn't trust my ability to recognize red flags. I'd see women I was attracted to and immediately start analyzing their behavior, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. It was exhausting. I started going to therapy in my second year away. My therapist, Dr. Rodriguez, helped me understand that what I'd experienced wasn't just a bad relationship, it was emotional abuse. The constant blame shifting, the gaslighting, the way Carla had made me question my own reality and self-worth, these were tactics abusers used to maintain control. It was both liberating and devastating to have a name for what I'd experienced. Liberating because it meant I wasn't crazy, I wasn't overly sensitive, I wasn't the problem. Devastating because it meant I'd spent 7 years of my life being systematically torn down by someone who claimed to love me. Slowly, very slowly, I started to rebuild. I made new friends through work and school. I joined a hiking group, started playing basketball at a local gym, took up photography as a hobby. I was rediscovering parts of myself that had been buried under years of trying to be what Carla wanted. I started dating again in my third year away, but carefully. I was upfront about my past, about my trust issues, about my need to take things slow. I had a few relationships that lasted a few months each. They were good people, but I wasn't ready for anything serious. I was still learning how to be myself in a relationship, how to maintain my boundaries, how to recognize when someone was treating me well. By my 4th year, I'd finished my degree and gotten a promotion at work. I was making good money, had a solid group of friends, and was starting to feel like myself again. I bought a small house in a quiet neighborhood, nothing fancy but it was mine. I was proud of what I'd built. Last month, I decided to throw a housewarming party. It was the first time I'd felt confident enough to invite people over, to show off what I'd accomplished. I invited my coworkers, my hiking group, some neighbors I'd gotten to know. I even invited Marcus and a few other friends from back home. The party was a success. My house was full of laughter and conversation. People were genuinely happy for me, genuinely impressed with what I'd achieved. I felt, for the first time in years, truly proud of myself. Marcus pulled me aside during the party and told me how different I seemed. He said I looked healthier, more confident, more like the person I'd been before Carla. He said he was proud of me for getting out, for rebuilding my life, for not letting her destroy me permanently. As the night wound down and people started to leave, I stood in my living room looking around at the life I'd built. It wasn't perfect, I was still working on trusting people, still careful about letting anyone get too close. But it was mine, and it was good. Yesterday started out like any other day. I worked from home, had a video call with my team, made dinner for myself while watching a movie. The weather had been getting progressively worse throughout the day, one of those late fall storms that comes in fast and hits hard. By evening, the wind was howling and the rain was coming down in sheets. I was settling in for the night, maybe planning to read a book or work on editing some photos I'd taken on my last hike. The lights flickered a few times, and I started gathering candles in case the power went out. That's when I heard the knock on my door. It was barely audible over the storm, but insistent. I figured it was probably a neighbor, Maybe Mrs. Chin from next door, whose power had gone out, or the college kid across the street who sometimes locked himself out. I grabbed a towel in case whoever it was needed to dry off. But when I opened the door, my world tilted on its axis. There she was. Carla. Standing on my doorstep, soaked to the bone, looking exactly like she had 4 years ago and completely different at the same time. Her hair was longer, darker. She was thinner than I remembered, her cheekbones more pronounced. But her eyes were the same, that intense, focused look that had captivated me when I was 18. For a moment, neither of us said anything. The storm raged around us, and I could feel the rain starting to blow into my entryway. She was shivering, whether from cold or nerves I couldn't tell. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was smaller than I remembered, more uncertain. She said my name like a question, like she wasn't sure I'd recognize her. I stood there frozen, holding the door handle, trying to process what I was seeing. How had she found me? How did she know where I lived? Why was she here, on this night, after all this time? She asked if she could come in, said she was sorry for showing up like this but she needed to talk to me. The rain was getting heavier, and despite everything, I couldn't just leave her standing there in the storm. I stepped aside and let her in. She stood in my entryway, dripping water onto my hardwood floors, looking around at my home with an expression I couldn't quite read. I grabbed another towel and handed it to her, then went to turn up the heat and give myself a moment to think. When I came back, she was still standing where I'd left her, like she was afraid to move without permission. She thanked me for the towel, for letting her in, for not slamming the door in her face. She said she knew she didn't deserve my kindness. I offered her coffee, more out of habit than genuine hospitality. She accepted gratefully, and I busied myself in the kitchen, trying to figure out what to say, what to do. My hands were shaking as I measured out the coffee grounds. She followed me into the kitchen, still wrapped in the towel. She complimented my house, said it was beautiful, said she was proud of me for doing so well. The words felt strange coming from her, like she was speaking a language she'd never learned properly. I handed her a mug and we sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd eaten breakfast that morning, where I'd paid bills and worked on my laptop and lived my quiet, peaceful life. Now it felt like a stage set, artificial and surreal. She started talking, and the words came out in a rush like she'd been rehearsing them. She told me she'd been thinking about me for years, that she'd made terrible mistakes, that she'd been young and stupid and scared. She said she'd been in therapy, that she'd learned things about herself, that she understood now why she'd hurt me. She said she'd been trying to find me for over a year. She'd asked around, talked to old friends, even hired a private investigator. She'd wanted to contact me sooner, but she'd wanted to make sure she was really ready, that she'd really changed. I listened to her talk, watched her perform again, and felt that familiar mix of emotions I'd hoped never to experience again. Part of me wanted to comfort her, to tell her it was okay, that I forgave her. That part of me that had loved her for 7 years was still there, buried but not dead. But mostly, I felt angry. Angry that she'd invaded my space, my new life, my peace. Angry that she thought she had the right to show up uninvited and expect me to listen. Angry that she'd apparently spent money hiring someone to track me down when I deliberately left no forwarding address. She must have seen something in my expression because she started talking faster, more desperately. She told me about her life since we'd broken up. She'd dated other people, but nothing had worked out. She'd realized that I was the only person who'd ever really loved her, who'd ever put up with her flaws and tried to help her be better. She said she'd been miserable without me, that she'd thought about suicide, that she'd finally understood what she'd lost. She said she'd spent years trying to find someone who would love her the way I had, but no one else had ever been willing to fight for her like I had. The irony was staggering. She was describing my devotion like it was a gift she'd thrown away, when at the time she'd made me feel like my love was a burden, like I was too much, too needy, too demanding. She reached across the table and tried to take my hand. I pulled away instinctively, and she flinched like I'd slapped her. She started crying then, not the manipulative tears I remembered, but something that seemed more genuine. She said she knew she had no right to ask, but she wanted to try again. She said she was different now, that she'd learned how to be in a relationship, that she'd never cheat again. She said she'd do anything to prove it to me, that she'd move here, quit her job, start over completely. She painted a picture of the life we could have together. She said she'd been thinking about it for months, planning it out. We could get married, buy a bigger house, have kids. She said she'd always imagined having my children, that she'd been stupid to wait so long. As she talked, I felt something breaking inside me. Not my heart, that had been broken years ago and had healed stronger. Something else. The last vestiges of the person I'd been when I was with her. The person who would have given anything to hear these words. I stood up abruptly and walked to the window, looking out at the storm. The rain was still coming down hard, and I could see tree branches bending in the wind. I thought about how long it had taken me to build this life, how much work I'd put into becoming someone I could respect. When I turned back to her, she was still crying, but she was watching me with that intense focus I remembered. She was trying to read me, to figure out what I was thinking, what she needed to say to get what she wanted. That's when I realized nothing had really changed. She was still the same person, still trying to manipulate me, still convinced that if she just found the right words, the right approach, she could get me back under her control. I told her no. The word came out of me with such finality that she stopped crying immediately. She looked at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language, like she couldn't understand what I'd said. I told her that I'd heard everything she'd said, that I understood she thought she'd changed, but that my answer was no. I wouldn't be trying again with her. I wouldn't be giving her another chance. I wouldn't be going back to that life. She started to argue, to explain, to promise, but I held up my hand to stop her. I told her I needed to say something, and that she needed to listen. I told her about the years after we broke up. About the therapy, about learning what emotional abuse was, about understanding that our relationship had been toxic from the beginning. I told her about the work I'd done to rebuild my self-esteem, to learn how to trust my own judgment, to recognize my own worth. I told her that I'd spent 7 years of my life trying to be good enough for her, trying to change myself to meet her ever-shifting expectations. I told her about the loneliness, the self-doubt, the way I'd lost myself trying to become what she wanted. I told her that I'd finally learned to love myself, to treat myself with the respect I deserved. I told her that I'd built a life I was proud of, surrounded myself with people who valued me, found work that fulfilled me. She tried to interrupt, to tell me that she valued me now, that she'd realized my worth. But I wasn't done. I told her that I'd learned something important in therapy, that people don't change as much as we'd like to think they do. That someone who lies and cheats and manipulates for 7 years doesn't become a different person because they go to therapy for a few months. I told her that even if she had changed, even if she'd become the person she claimed to be, it was too late for us. That I'd moved on, that I'd become someone different too, someone who wouldn't accept being treated the way she'd treated me. She started crying again, but this time it seemed different. Less calculated, more desperate. She said she'd been counting on me, that she'd been so sure I'd take her back because I'd always taken her back before. That admission hit me like a physical blow. She'd been counting on me. She'd been so confident in her ability to manipulate me that she'd appended her life to come find me, certain that I'd fall back into the same patterns. I felt a surge of anger unlike anything I'd experienced in years. All the rage I'd suppressed, all the hurt I'd worked so hard to heal, all the betrayal I'd tried to forgive, it all came rushing back. I told her that she was right, that the old me would have taken her back. That the old me would have believed her promises, would have given her another chance, would have spent another 7 years trying to earn her love. But I told her that person was gone. That she'd killed him with her lies and her cheating and her constant blame. That I'd had to rebuild myself from scratch, and the person I'd become was someone who valued himself too much to go back to being her emotional punching bag. She was sobbing now, begging me to reconsider, telling me that she'd kill herself if I didn't give her another chance. And there it was, the final manipulation, the last desperate attempt to control me through guilt and fear. I told her calmly that if she was having thoughts of suicide, she should call a crisis hotline or go to the hospital. I told her that her mental health was her responsibility, not mine, and that I wouldn't be manipulated by threats of self-harm. The look on her face when I said that was something I'll never forget. It was like she was seeing me for the first time, like she finally understood that I really had changed, that her old tactics weren't going to work. The storm was starting to clear by the time she finally accepted that I wasn't going to change my mind. She asked if she could stay until morning, said she didn't have anywhere else to go. I told her there was a hotel about 10 minutes away, and that I'd call her a taxi. She gathered her things slowly, like she was hoping I'd change my mind at the last minute. She asked if we could at least be friends, if she could call me sometimes, if we could stay in touch. I told her no, that I needed her to respect my boundaries and leave me alone. As she was leaving, she turned back one more time. She told me that she'd never love anyone the way she loved me, that she'd spend the rest of her life regretting what she'd done. She said she hoped I'd be happy, but that I'd never find anyone who loved me as much as she did. I closed the door behind her and stood in my entryway, listening to the taxi pull away. I realized I was shaking, not from fear or sadness, but from adrenaline. I'd done it. I'd faced my past and chosen my future. It's been a week since that night, and I'm still processing what happened. I won't lie, there have been moments when I've wondered if I made the right choice. There have been moments when I've remembered the good times, when I've thought about the life she described, when I've felt the pull of that old familiar longing. But mostly, I feel proud. Proud that I didn't cave, that I didn't let her manipulate me again, that I stood up for myself and the life I've built. Proud that I've finally learned to value myself enough to walk away from someone who doesn't deserve me. I've been thinking about what she said, that I'd never find anyone who loved me as much as she did. The irony is that she was probably right, but not in the way she meant. I hope I never find someone who loves me the way she did, because her love was selfish and destructive and toxic. What I want, what I'm working toward, is finding someone who loves me the way I've learned to love myself. Someone who respects me, who values my opinions, who doesn't try to change me or control me. Someone who sees my worth and doesn't make me fight for their attention. I called my therapist the day after Carla's visit. Dr. Rodriguez said she was proud of how I'd handled the situation, that it showed how much I'd grown. She said that facing our past like that can be a test of how far we've come, and that I'd passed with flying colors. I also called Marcus and told him what had happened. He was amazed that she'd tracked me down, but not surprised that she'd tried to get me back. He said he'd always thought she'd come crawling back once she realized what she'd lost. But the truth is, I don't think she ever really understood what she'd lost. She saw me as someone who was always there, always available, always willing to take her back. She never saw me as a person with my own worth, my own dreams, my own right to be loved properly. I'm still angry sometimes. I broke my favorite chair the other day, not out of sadness or longing, but out of pure rage at her audacity. She'd spent money to track me down, disrupted my peace, invaded my space, and then had the nerve to act surprised when I didn't welcome her back with open arms. But I'm also grateful. Grateful that I've learned to recognize my own worth, that I've built a life I'm proud of, that I've surrounded myself with people who treat me well. Grateful that I had the strength to say no, to choose myself over the familiarity of dysfunction. I'm 28 years old now, and I'm finally starting to understand what healthy love looks like. It's not the desperate, all-consuming thing I had with Carla. It's not the constant drama, the walking on eggshells, the feeling like you're never quite good enough. Healthy love is calm and steady and secure. It's knowing that someone chooses you every day, not because they have to, but because they want to. It's being able to be yourself without fear of judgment or rejection. It's having disagreements without having your entire worth called into question. I'm not in a relationship right now, and I'm okay with that. I'm learning to be happy alone, to enjoy my own company, to build a life that's fulfilling even without a romantic partner. When the right person comes along, I'll be ready. But I'll never again settle for someone who treats me like I'm lucky to have their attention. The storm that brought Carla to my door has passed, and the sun is shining again. My house is still standing, my life is still good, and I'm still the person I've worked so hard to become. She couldn't take that away from me, no matter how hard she tried. I'm healing, I'm growing, and I'm finally, truly free.